I enjoyed that offertory music a lot. I will say, Mandy told me when she read the sermon title, Living on the Edge, she had this 90s rock song in mind, so I was a little surprised. But as we begin this morning, there was a book by an author named Bruce Wilkinson. He wrote in 2003 called The Dream Giver. And if you like allegories like Pilgrim's Progress, it's a pretty similar story to that. It also reads a little bit like Dr. Seuss. It's kind of between those two. The story is of a man named Ordinary. He is from a people called the Nobodies, and he lives far away in the land of Familiar. He's given a dream to fulfill by God, and it isn't long before he tells his friend, named Best Friend, creative title, and his best friend advises him, don't tell anybody about this God-given dream because they'll think you're foolish. Ordinary thinks about it, and he thinks, and days go by when he just can't wait any longer. He's got to pursue this God-given dream that's deep within him. So he sets out to leave the land of Familiar and to leave the comfort zone. As he approaches the edge, he sees a sign that says, leaving comfort zone, leaving the land of Familiar, entering borderland. He ponders this for a while. He gets anxious. He even starts to head back for home, but then he realizes as he moves away from the border, he starts to feel sad because he left his dream back there at the border. Suddenly he realizes he can't have his dream pursued and stay within the comfort zone at the same time. He's got to choose one. So he goes back, he picks up that dream, and he heads across the border, boldly going into the land of the unfamiliar. Now, he had heard rumors that when you leave the land of unfamiliar, there's a place called the Valley of Giants, and that there are bullies there that might meet you on the border. But he's surprised to find out those bullies, those giants that he has to face, there's friends. There's family who have come and gathered to tell him not to go any further. You see, when he leaves his little bubble, it threatens to pop theirs. When he leaves to pursue his mission, it threatens their level of comfort. They stand to lose something if this nobody becomes a somebody. So Ordinary pushes on. He fights his giants of insecurity, uncertainty, moneylessness, and rejection, until he arrives in the land of promise. He pursues his dream of helping others, helping people pursue their dreams, helping those that are in poverty, and pleasing God who gave him this big dream to begin with. See, this story illustrates for us some important points, and that is that God has a mission for each of us. Now, we might ignore that dream. We might even get right up to the very edge, to the border. We stand on the edge of something great, and we know on the inside, if we will pursue God's plan for us, there's something that's great on the other side. But so often we let fear and uncertainty paralyze us. We toe the line. We don't dare to cross over into God's promise. We look at it from far off. We see it. We may even feel righteous, thinking, well, I have good intentions. I have big dreams. And good intentions and big dreams are important, but they don't mean a lot if we don't pursue them. If we're not willing to cross the line into God's plan and to risk leaving behind what is safe and familiar. I wonder how many of you this morning have crossed that line. How many of you have left the land of familiar? You've answered the call. And at some point you've approached the edge. You might have had some idea of what you were getting into. Or maybe you had no guarantees of what lied down the road. Would you come into danger? Would you even make it out alive? But you boldly crossed the line. Your actions might have made other people uncomfortable. I wonder how many of you had someone to try and talk you out of it. I wonder how many of you have had that story. Someone told you, no, it's dangerous. Don't do that. Don't go pursue that dream, it's dangerous. Or how many of you have ever heard this? Nobody in our family's ever done this. Anybody heard that one? Nobody's ever done this in our family. What makes you think you can do this? Nobody else has before. What makes you so special? Some of you personally know what it's like to get to the edge of something and cross over, and how terribly frightening, but yet exhilarating that can be. I want to share with you this morning a story of a military operation. It's found in Numbers chapter 13 and 14. If you're following along in the YouVersion app by clicking More and Events and the name of the church, you see it there, but also it should be on the notes on the inside of your bulletin, that little separate handout. This was a spy operation, reconnaissance. So here's the context. God has freed the people of Israel, the Israelites, from their captivity to Egypt. And now, under Moses' leadership, they're headed to the Promised Land. Now normally, if you're spying on the enemy, we want to find out if you can defeat them. What are their weak points? What do we as a people, as a military, have to do to crumble their defenses? And certainly Israel is going to have to step up to the battle here. But the real work we see in this passage doesn't come from the Israelites. It comes from God. In chapter 13, starting with the first verse, the Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders." So we see several things going on here. What should happen if you were sending a man from each of the 12 tribes, then you have, when these people come back, you've got a family member who has been invested in this mission. Someone from your own family should come back and tell you, yes, we should do this, we should pursue this. But the biggest thing is, God says, I am giving this to you. It's not a question. It's not a, well, maybe if. God says, I'm giving this to the Israelites. Now, a little problem with that, when you're going into the Promised Land to take it, there's other people who live there. And I'm not just going to step aside and give it to you. So they are going to face some kind of hostility, some military encounters. When we read God's Word, we talk about putting on the full armor of God, and that's what they're going to have to do here. But God does the heaviest lifting. We might still have to fight. We might have to show up to the battlefield wearing the full armor of God. We might have our marching orders and we go forward. We might still have to fight and to sacrifice. But our contribution is nothing compared to the contribution that God is doing. Whereas the enemy might put at the front line their toughest men. They might send in their heaviest artillery to the front line in the encounter. We have the front lines, God. As Romans 8:31 says, if God is for us, who can be against us? And down to verse 37, knowing all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Going back to Numbers 13 and verse 17 now. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. Okay, let's get down to verse 25. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. So it's interesting from Moses' order what he says, but also what he doesn't say. He wants to know if the cities are walled or fortified, whether the people are strong or weak. So he is paying attention to strategy, but there's nothing to indicate that he thinks it's an impossible task. He's simply gathering details on how Israel will do its part while God does his part. Moses wants to know about the soil and have spies bring back some of the grapes. So when I read this, in my mind, Moses is already making plans for where the farms and the gardens and the vineyards are going to go, isn't he? Yes, I want to know what the military strategy is going to be. We're going to attack here, here, and here. But when we conquer, because we are going to conquer, because God is giving this to us, I think there's going to be a little garden over here. There's going to be a farm over here. I think this is where we'll plant the vineyard. Moses is making plans to move in because he's confident God is giving it to us. He just wants to know the details of what's next. Verse 26, they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Now what the spies are doing here is they're giving a list of the worst of the worst. If someone from outside of the U.S. was to ask you, where are the most dangerous people groups? What are the most dangerous people groups that are in the U.S.? We might say, back in an earlier time, we would have said the mafia. We would have said the mafia was someone to be reckoned with. We might think of certain parts of the U.S. and say, well, there's gangs. There's dangerous gangs in this part and in this part. In some places, there might be a terror cell. Some terrorists from another country that's come in and they want to do us harm. So you would list out the worst of the worst. Here's what the spies are doing. They're listing out all of these people groups and where they live. Here's this group of people who would kill us. Who's this group of people? They're listing out the most violent and intimidating people. But so far, it seems like what they've done is just list out facts. Okay, we went in there. The land is flowing with milk and honey. It's great for grapes. We brought you back some grapes. There are several people groups that we're going to have to face. They live here, 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 here. Just so far, it sounds like facts. But as we read down in this passage, we get the impression that they're not just listing facts. They're not just telling what they've seen, but they state it in a tone of voice that would spark fear in the people. They might just be transferring their fears to the crowd. And the reason I say this is because in verse 30 we read that Caleb has to silence the crowd. Obviously they're fearful from what they have heard. So the spies aren't trying to calm their fears. The spies are rousing them up. The spies are making the people in the camp frightful. So it's not only what they are saying, but it's how they are saying it. Any of you ever have friends or family that do like that? It's not just what they say, it's how they say it. Somebody says something to you ugly at a family gathering, and if you go to tell somebody later, well, did you believe what they said to me? And you say, well, that doesn't sound that bad. You had to have been there. It wasn't what they said, it's how they said it. And you can't even replicate because you just kind of had to have been there. I think that's what's happening here. It's not just what they're saying, it's how they're saying it. They're putting a little bit of a spin on it. They are giving some fake news, as we'd say today. That's what I think is happening here. The spies come back and they are arousing fear in the camp. They've gotten so close. They've seen the land that God is giving to them. And they've come to the edge of taking the promised land. They come right up to the line, but they're afraid to cross it. Their solution is to turn back, cut their losses. That is, except for two courageous men that God uses. Look down at verse 30. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. Now notice the wording here, a bad report. It's not that everything they said was wildly inconsistent or wrong. There are some enemies out there, but they start making up facts. They start making up assumptions, and they start saying things in such a way as to arouse fear. Again, fake news. They should have known not to fear, because this was the land that God said he was giving to them. And not just here, but earlier parts of the Bible, God has stated, I'm giving this land to you. Over and over again, not just in the book of Numbers, but over and over again, God says, I am giving this land to you. You see this land over here, it's going to be yours. You're going to go in, you're going to take it. I'm giving it to you. Suit up with your armor. You have your marching orders going on the battlefield, but it's not a question of if. It's maybe a question of when, but it's going to happen. So God has continuously made these promises, and God has this track record thus far in the story of performing miracles in order to make things happen, of parting the Red Sea so his people can go forward, of leading them as a pillar of fire by night so that they can follow him in that way. So what makes this a bad report is this total lack of faith that the spies have. God has made a promise, but they don't think he's going to fulfill that promise. He has said, if you follow me, this is what's in store for you. And they've heard the promise and they say, I don't believe it. I don't think he'll do it. I wonder if that's our story this morning. And God puts a promise out there and you say, I don't know. That sounds like a big, tall order. I don't think God will do it. We think that our own limitations are so great that even God cannot bypass our limitations when it's not up to us. It's not up to our ability. It's up to God, his ability. I don't think God can do it because I'm not that great at this. I've never done this before. None of my family and my friends have ever done this before. And God says, it's not about that. I didn't use you and your buddies as a benchmark. It's what I can do. The spies say, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. Now, a couple things going on there. Some commentators believe when the Bible says the land devours those who were living in it, that means a plague has stricken the land. So it would follow, if the people have been stricken with plague, they're laid up in the infirmary, or they're at home, they're coughing, throwing up, they're doing whatever it is that this plague causes, they're not going to be able to defend themselves very well, are they? Remember we said before, God goes out before his people. So we have reason to believe that God says, okay, I'm going to win this battle for you. So before the Israelites even step on to the battlefield, God says, I'm going to wipe a lot of them out for you. They're going to be stricken with plague. Some of them are going to die, and those that aren't dead, they're not already in good shape to pick up a sword and come after you. I'm going to make this easy for you. So this could be a blessing from God. But one of the most disturbing things, it's odd to me, the level of assumption and presumption here, but then I can't judge it because I do this too, and maybe we all do this, is that they say the Nephilim, we saw the Nephilim there, descendants of the Nephilim, they were giants, and when they saw us, we looked like grasshoppers to them. Now, how do you know that? How do you know what the giants are thinking of you? Did they go up to the giants? Did they go to the local tavern, pick a fight with the giant to see how they respond? They said, you look like a grasshopper to me. Take it back as part of the report. I tried to pick a fight with them, they said I look like a grasshopper. How could they possibly know what the giants are thinking of them? They don't know. They don't know what the giants are thinking of them, but they put it in their mind. They've already had the altercation. They've already had the battle in their mind. And they've already lost the battle before they ever got started. Y'all ever do that? You ever have a fight with somebody in your head and you lose it? I've done it. You ever think before you go into a confrontation, you plan it out in your head and you say, I'm going to say to them this, but then they'll probably say this. Then I'll say this, and they'll probably say this. And before you've even had this conversation, you've lost and you've already conceded all your power, and they have no idea. You have lost the argument in your mind before you even came to them. They have no idea something's wrong, maybe. But that's something we do. We defeat ourselves before we ever get started. Those of you who are married or you're in a relationship, you can maybe identify with this level of assumption that we might bring in. There have been times before where I have been to the hospital and someone is dying. Or I've talked to somebody and they're going through an awful time. And those things kind of weigh on you and your heart goes out to someone and you come home and I have completely forgotten what it was I was even bummed about, but I'm bummed. And Brooke has asked me, because she knows me better than I do, she said, what's wrong? Why? Nothing wrong. I know you. I know something's wrong. And I kind of think back and say, well, okay, yeah, it's because I was holding hands with somebody who was on their deathbed earlier today. That's why I'm a little bit upset. But I've already kind of put it out of my mind. All I know is I'm bummed. But she can pick up on it. There's been times when Brooke has been dealing with a situation where she's told me about a student that has an awful home life. and some of the situations that they have to deal with. And she works with special education. So some of the stories she has told me, I thought, goodness, if I grew up in that environment, I would probably act out as well. And there's heartbreaking situations, and it's weighing on her. And I have made the mistake, especially when we were newlywed, I always thought it was my fault. It had nothing to do with me. But I played it through in my head. And when we first got married, I did not know how to load a dishwasher. So I broke so many of her favorite glasses and plates. So she would come home, something weighing on her mind about a student, and I'd go through in my head, I'd say, oh gosh, I broke another glass, didn't I? I broke her favorite plate or something. I'm already apologizing. I'm sorry about the glass. What glass? Oh, gosh, nothing. I've already owned up to it. But it would have nothing to do with me. Sometimes we can set up these assumptions in our head that somebody is upset with us, or when we're facing the giants in our life. I'm already defeated. That this giant sees me as a grasshopper in their own eyes. We haven't even had the altercation, but we've already lost it. We can ascribe to people emotions and behaviors they don't even hold. We act like people are out to get us, like we cannot achieve our goals because we imagine there are bullies, there are giants at the edge of borderland that are waiting to defeat us. And maybe there will be. Maybe there are giants who are waiting to tell us we can't do it, or waiting to discourage us. But we defeat ourselves before we ever set out on the journey. We just assume that we've already lost. And wouldn't life be easier if every time we took a bold step in the direction of God's will, if all of our friends, our families, our neighbors lifted us up, metaphorically of course, on their shoulders and carried us around and cheered for us, that's right, that's great. You're pursuing God's will for your life. And one of the wonderful things about church, having a church family, is that yes, we do encounter some of that. We have other people in the church who encourage us and sort of lift us up on their shoulders and encourage us, and that really helps. But outside of the church and the rest of the world, often we have people who can discourage us. We try to cross the line, pursue God's plans for us, and it might get in the way of someone else's comfort zone. They might try to discourage us. We could be called fanatic. I remember in the maybe late 80s, early 90s, DC Talk had a song called Jesus Freak. That was the phrase people were throwing out there then. You might be called a Jesus freak if you're pursuing God's will for your life. It can be strange. It can feel really lonely. It can feel like you're the only person with the integrity, the strength that's following after God. But we jump over to chapter 14 in the book of Numbers, and look what happens. That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, if only we had died in Egypt, or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. You hear that word devour coming back. The land devours the people because God went ahead, and who's left will devour them. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of if you're going to go. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Here's our heroes, let's stone them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. And as we read continuing on in this passage, the glory of the Lord appearing at the tent is when God verifies, yes, listen to these men. They're telling the truth. I didn't lie to you, and they're not lying to you. So here, Caleb is now joined with Joshua, and they're on the same page as the leadership of Moses and Aaron. So we've got four men who are all making a very public display out of their disappointment and the lack of faith that the people have. And back in that day, they tear their clothes. And tearing their clothes in that day is a little bit like pulling your hair out. It's a little bit like slamming your fist on the table and saying, I've had enough. It's a very dramatic statement when you tear at your clothes. And Caleb is making this stand, and he's in good company. But still the fact remains, he's about to be stoned. He's standing up for what's right. He has a very small group of people with him. But he's about to get ready to be stoned before God weighs in on the matter. Having other God-worshiping people by your side is nice, but it doesn't guarantee that hardship won't come. But then the glory of God shines in the tent of meeting, and God weighs in. At the beginning of chapter 14, the people are wailing. They're declaring what horrible things they think will happen to them. And as you read this, it's almost comical how ridiculous it is that they haven't even gone to battle yet, but they're already defeated. God has said, I'm giving the land to you. The spies have come and said, we should take the land because certainly we can take it and we will overcome them. But what are they saying? It's all over. We're going to be plundered. Our wives and our daughters are going to be taken. They're going to kill us in savage and vicious ways. We've already lost the battle. They hadn't even begun yet. They hadn't even launched out yet. It becomes a self-defeating, self-fulfilling prophecy because God gives them what they expected. Their bodies will fall in the desert, but it won't be to the sword. It'll be because they'll die before they ever get to see the promised land. Their children will indeed suffer, but it won't be at the hands of the enemy, but it'll be by the consequences of the sins of the fathers. They will be stuck out in the wilderness 1 year for every day of the reconnaissance mission, and the spies were out. For 40 days they were out spying. For 40 years, Israel will be forced to wander before they can really achieve the promised land. And I know this is a little bit of an aside, but it's a theme we keep saying, that number of 40. That 40 days for the spy mission. They didn't trust in God, so 40 years of wandering in the desert. When we see Jonah in the belly of the whale because he refused to go where God wanted him to go. How many days was he in the belly of the whale? 40. When we see Jesus tried in the desert, how long does the devil tempt him in the desert? For 40. We see that number 40 come back over and over again. Whenever you see the number 40 in the Bible, pay attention to that because God is doing something there. And the message here that God is sending seems to be very clear. He lays out an opportunity for his people to take. He just gives them the gift. Here, take it. I promise you good things. And they can take it, they can reap his blessings. Or they can imagine a negative outcome, a negative outcome that they are in effect choosing. I'm going to imagine the worst. I'm going to set up an argument in my head. I'm going to set up the worst possible scenario, and now I'm defeated. The whole thing, the whole battle's played out in the battlefield of my mind, and I lost. And they hadn't even got out there yet. It's ironic because the very thing they are afraid of is what they got. Because they chose it. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy. They were defeated before they began. All these wonderful things. I hope that this doesn't happen. I hope this doesn't happen. Well, you made it happen by choosing other than God's will. Instead of having faith and stepping out and pursuing your God-given dream, they stay back. And all these things happen to them anyway. Are any of you living defeated right now? I know most of you seem to be very strong Christians and you seem to have it all together, but I know we all have that inner person inside that not everybody sees. There's more to all of us than anybody else sees. Sometimes we can't even see it ourselves. Sometimes there's things within us that other people that really know us might be able to point out to us. That's again another advantage of having a Christian community around us, that you've got people who you can be open and honest with. Sometimes they can see things inside of you that you don't even see. That you say, that's not there. Oh yeah, it is. Oh yeah, it is. And people can help you to see those things. But sometimes we can't even see ourselves that we've chosen defeat. And if you've been living in defeat for long enough, that becomes your norm. That becomes your new normal. If you've been in defeat long enough, that's all you know. It can be really easy to grow numb and to forget you ever had a God-given dream in the first place. It's possible that some of you here this morning are being asked by God to do something. Maybe it's publicly. Maybe it's something in your personal life. Maybe it's something you need to do. Maybe it's something you need to stop doing. Maybe it's an addiction you need to break. Or a pattern of behavior that's just not healthy for you. Perhaps you're on that line and you're ready to cross over. But you think, my friends, my family, they won't understand. This might upset the whole balance of things and our whole family system, my friends. It's just going to upset things. It's going to rock the boat. Maybe you think, I'm the only one that thinks this is a good idea. No one else thinks it's a good idea. No one else has ever attempted this before. Or maybe no one from where I'm at has attempted this before. I'll be all alone if I do it. But let these scriptures in Numbers 13 and 14 challenge you. Be a Caleb. Be a Joshua. Be a man or woman who stands up and says, we should go forward. I should go forward. Because we can certainly overcome with God's help. Who could be against us? We are more than conquerors. As we sing this final song, I hope you'll come forward as God is leading you. Perhaps you need to accept Him into your life. Perhaps you need to rededicate your life to Him. Perhaps you're ready to finally cross that line and to fulfill what God has in store for you. Perhaps God is calling on you to take a step of faith, and that line is just a few feet away from your seat this morning. Won't you cross it this morning as we sing our final song?